Payal. Thank you for that very, very flattering introduction. We have on the show today Mr. Thomas Varghese. Mr. Thomas Varghese is the business head of domestic textiles, overseas spinning and acrylic fiber business of the Aditya Birla Group textile businesses, overseeing 3 domestic and 7 overseas companies. Mr. Varghese has been with the Aditya Birla Group for the last 22 plus years, holding multiple positions across businesses, and has been instrumental in leading his team to assume leadership positions on the global front. His last assignment as MD and CEO of the Aditya Birla Retail Limited. As business head of Aditya Birla Retail, he oversaw the growth of all formats across India. ABRL has emerged as one of India's foremost supermarkets and hypermarket retailer. He has held coveted leadership position in various trade bodies over the years. He is a current co-chair of the Water Cluster Board of World Business Council for Sustainable Development. He is also the current chairman of the National Committee of Marketing and Branding for ASSOCHEM. He has been decorated with a string of prestigious awards, more about which we will hear from in a while. He is also an ICA certified coach. It is this dynamic personality we have on the show today. Welcome, Mr. Thomas Varghese.
Thank you, Premraj, for that.
So let's start. As part of your working life, you have traversed the globe. For the benefit of the participants on the show, request you to please trace your footprints around the world.
Thank you, Premraj, and thank you, Bloom, for having me on this call. I think I'm at the, like they say, the fag end of my career. So it's a career which is almost lasted 39 years and with a few more years to go. I actually started my intense travel around 1990 and 1991 when I was with a company called Indian Organic Chemicals Limited. That's when I started my international travel. The travel took me to many parts of the world, and we were a first in many respects in the polyester industry. So it was quite interesting to meet stakeholders and value chain players across the world. Starting with Europe, which was a big market for me at that time, and also traversing the US and some parts of Asia. Those 7-8 years of travel really helped open my eyes to what the world offers. So I got to know Europe very well. I got to know parts of Asia well. And as I moved into this role, which I currently am in my 9th year of, I have a multicultural, multi-geographical workforce. I operate out of 7 countries. I have a workforce of more than 14,000 people. These 7 countries are Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Germany, Slovakia, India, Spain. And we have multiple interests. I run 3 businesses for the group today. But to tell you about my learnings on the global footprint, I started traveling to China in 1992. That is the first trip I made. And over the years, I almost traveled to China every year for business and for some exhibitions. The first time I landed in China, I could see the green beret uniform Chinese soldier carrying a Sten gun look quite archaic, but that is the vision I have of China in 1992. Every year I travel to China was an eye-opener for me. The airports became bigger and bigger. The infrastructure improved with every passing year of my visit. And I have always been a great China fan ever since I saw this transformation in front of my eyes. And over the years, of course, we all know what China achieved in the 90s and the 2000s, early 2000s. These visits to China helped me in doing the first Chinese acquisition for the group of a company producing viscose staple fiber. In 2005, Mr. Birla gave me this job because we had been working for about 4-5 years. And every time we came to closing a deal or even did a deal, the deal never went through because the Chinese are very difficult to predict till the deal was done. I was successful after about 8-10 months of search around entire China, which took me to practically the most significant provinces of China and opened my eyes to the Chinese hinterland. And it was not only about Shanghai or Beijing or Qingdao, it was or Guangzhou. It was about looking at various provinces of China, including going up to Mongolia on several occasions. And I was successful in closing the deal. And in 2006, we acquired the first Chinese company. So that was the beginning of my international exposure. Subsequently, after that, Mr. Birla brought me back to Bombay to manage the pulp business, which was really based out of Canada, India, and Laos. Even while I was in my operations in India, I had started working on the Laos plantation and pulp project and was also involved in the Canadian pulp projects. So eventually we have 3 companies in Canada. And we had the pulp and plantation company in Laos, and the plant I was managing in Karnataka, in Harihar, one of the largest plants in the group at that time, also had a large pulp plant. So working in the North American continent gave me a very good exposure on how the Americas work. And doing a very major project, which meant acquisition of a pulp plant and converting it from a paper grade pulp to a dissolving grade pulp plant, was a great experience by itself. But what it taught me was how different it was to manage culturally as opposed to managing the operations that I used to manage in India. You know, it is very interesting to see that how one engages even with one's subordinates. And, you know, it was very easy to give feedback to a colleague or a subordinate in India, even if they were very tough conversations. But the manner in which I had to do these conversations, because I was the managing director of the pulp operations in Canada, with all my CEOs and my other colleagues, CXOs, was very, very different. This opened my eyes to cross-cultural working for the first time. And this, of course, came on the heels of the acquisition of the Chinese plant. In sharp contrast, working in Laos, which in early 2000s was less developed. In fact, comparatively, if you look at the countries around that belt, Cambodia, Bangkok, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos was very, very underdeveloped at that time. And I was thrown in a position where I had to manage the entire Lao government. And it was a great experience to have a project approved by the Parliament of Laos, there was no precedent for it before. And to be able to acquire more than 30,000 hectares of land for my project of developing pulp plantations, and to see how stakeholder management in a different foreign environment could really make a big difference. It was a great learning experience for me during this period. And it naturally led to the point where in 2012, Mr. Birla brought me back from the retail business to the textile business, which was my core business. In textiles, I started with the domestic textile businesses, which we had 3 units in India, and moved on to taking charge of the entire Southeast Asian operations. So we had plants in Indonesia. I had 3 plants in Indonesia at that point in time. I had a plant in Thailand. I had 2 plants in Thailand. I had a plant in Philippines, and I had a plant in Egypt to complement the plant that I was managing in India. They were all different businesses. So in 2012-13, I got thrown into managing a completely vast and a wide multi-geographical operation, which came with its own challenges. Over the years, I think I have learned a lot about managing in multicultural societies, multi-geographical operations, and understanding that the culture and sensitivity of people in different parts of the world is very different. I also had a good taste of this, and I must mention it here. When I was in Harvard for the AMP, they had started at that point in time, and this was early 2000s, experimenting with what they called living groups. So each one of us who was part of AMP was put in a living group. So I was in a living group with 7 more people, and these 7 people came from 6 different countries. And therefore, including me, there were 7 countries represented in this group. And the whole concept of learning in a living group concept that I learned at Harvard remained with me for a long time and continues to stay with me. It was amazing to see how people from different cultures and different walks of life respond to the same stimuli differently. The value systems that people bring, let's say a person from Europe, that to the Netherlands and the countries that today lead in sustainability in value systems, was very different from what came from Asia or Africa and what even came from the US. So multicultural learning and living in a global world is a very, very important element of learning, without which it is very difficult to manage cross-cultural operation. I also had the unique privilege of having to close a plant in Egypt. And that learning of how to close a plant was a very difficult one. And I understood that liquidation of companies in Egypt had taken years and decades. And the learning turned out to be true. I'm still trying to close entirely the company, though there's no assets, everything is liquidated. In the last 7-8 years, I've had the privilege of helping my company acquire more assets around the world. In 2017, I acquired a small boutique Spanish company called Pyrotex, German company with assets in Spain. And it is a specialty polymeric fiber, the best flame retardant fiber in the world today, better than even DuPont's products. And this was followed by an acquisition of a Turkish company in India, where I dealt with the Turkish majors. It's a company called Soktas Limited, which makes the best premium cotton shirting fabrics in the world. And this company, which is a Turkish company, had put up a plant in India. So I think this was followed by a very difficult acquisition of a technical textile company in Europe, the leading technical textile company in Europe at that point in time. In 2019, I acquired a company which had plants in Germany, in a place called Kaiserlautern, close to Frankfurt, and another plant in Slovakia in a place called Levis, which was close to Vienna airport, about 2 hours drive from Vienna. This gave us an insight into how the Europeans operate too, not just in Germany, but also in an Eastern Europe country called Slovakia. So all these learnings really have been instrumental in making us understand how one should operate in an international environment, how one needs to be very sensitive to the nuances which exist in these countries, and how one should be able to deal with one's colleagues and workforce, including even the CEOs of these companies. Because we retained the CEOs of the companies to continue managing the company even after the acquisition. So yes, I think, this last decade or so, and of course the last 2 decades, have shaped my understanding of working in international operations and understanding cross-cultural sensitivities and learning to work in them. So it's been a great learning, and I really I'm completely obliged to Mr. Birla for having given me this opportunity of great and immense learning over this last 2 decades, particularly in international operations. So I hope that answers your question in some degree.
Yes, it does. You have had a checkered career, and thanks for sharing that. The cultural differences that different countries have and how to navigate those minefields that you mentioned about, especially the closing of a plant in Egypt. There would have been a lot of complications, I'm sure, about it. Taking it forward, in the backdrop of the pandemic, the rules of employee engagement have changed dramatically. There is uncertainty, anxiety, and all-round fear. According to you, what can or what could a leader do to salvage the situation?
Thank you, Pregraj. In this unprecedented new reality, we will witness a dramatic restructuring of the economic and social order in which business and society have traditionally operated. And of course, in the near future, we will see the beginnings of a lot of discussion and debate about what the next normal could entail and how sharply its contours would diverge from those that previously shaped our lives. So how do we lead from the crisis of today to the next normal that will emerge after the battle against coronavirus has been won, has been the question on everyone's mind. And your question as to what is important, specifically from an employee engagement point of view, I think the social contract between the employer and the employee have changed. The ways of working has changed. The way in which the whole world is working today, more or less remotely, has changed the culture of organizations. We cannot expect the culture of the organization that existed pre-COVID to continue as it was. The culture where people are working from homes, where there is greater deployment of technology, where remote working has become a way of life, where decision-making is taken in a more decentralized manner, have all changed the complete hues of employee engagement. In fact, I would say that what this really entails is we are very clearly in a VUCA world. And in a VUCA world, the employee, irrespective of all that he sees around him, is anxious. Many of them go into depression. Many of them are concerned about their jobs, particularly as many companies who do not have the vision, taking short-term decisions to cut costs, maybe to manage their liquidity and solvency. I think we have dealt with this in a very wonderful way. I think from the day the lockdowns were announced in India, and the lockdown in different parts of the world came at different points in time. And since I manage a global operation, my issues have always to do with the entire global business context that I operate. We went into, very interestingly, we created a small core group of CXOs and we started having a management meeting every day. This may have looked a little painful to people in the beginning, but all the CEOs and CXOs were part of this call every day. It was a short call, not more than 30, 45 minutes. But this gave a sense of reassurance to people that we were connected, number one. Number two, the IT team worked round the clock to enable a remote working by the entire organization, not just in India, but also globally. This would have been thought impossible, if not completely not possible to do in the years ahead. But it was fantastic to see how our employees also rose to the occasion, and with connectivity remotely, we were able to get connected on a regular basis. We tried to create a sense of oneness for the entire business, more than we had been able to do even in the physical world. That because every business of the group was represented at these calls, and every business was represented in even the town halls that we were doing, we started having a feeling of more one ABG Textiles that we never had before. In addition to communication, and I would say that communication is absolutely the key in a pandemic of this kind, which struck the whole world and brought it to its knees. We were able to communicate with our teams. So we had business town halls, we had all business town halls, we had ExCom meetings continuously with our businesses, where the agenda was not only about the business continuity. Business continuity, of course, was the foremost thing in our minds, and how to get back to normal after closure of many plants around the world for different points in time and for different periods of time. The most important thing was to give people a sense that there is a strong backing of the Aditya Birla Group to every business, irrespective of the conditions that are prevailing in different countries. So communication became key, and we started a lot of R&R. Now, I had been struggling with R&Rs, that's reward and recognition, even in the physical world. I was not able to get my HR teams to really move. And it was amazing how they put together rewards and recognition program for people who were walking the extra mile, who were going beyond the call of duty. Maybe it could be to help people during COVID times, maybe to help their fellow colleagues, maybe to help families of their colleagues, and to do impossible things. Because, during the pandemic, when markets were closed, our retail stores were closed, it was very difficult to get off the ground. And I think these rewards and recognition gave another pillar of strength to the people. Thirdly, in all our people policies, as a group, we ensured that we did not get into any short-term correction or letting go of people. We did take some actions to reduce our costs, but it was never to let go of people indiscriminately. And therefore, and to communicate this, that we would not do it irrespective of not even working for months together and keeping our plants closed. I think all these steps gave a sense of strength, a sense of confidence, and a sense of knowing that there is somebody who cares about them and their well-being. And it was not just that they were left to fend for themselves. And of course, the pandemic was hard on different people. We lost some colleagues. It was a sad moment, but as a team, we tried to do everything for the persons who were affected and their families. And I'm really delighted that, as a corollary to the second wave, we've come out with certain policies which are completely COVID-based policies for our employees, including for those people who lost their lives and who lost family members. And I really have to salute Mr. Birla for his vision and his compassion and his humanity. That what we have come out with has given so much confidence to the people in Aditya Birla Group that they know that if they are sick or if their family is sick in any part of the world, there will be support coming by not just code reds, but by hospital beds arrangements being tied up, oxygen concentrators being made arranged, oxygen cylinders being kept in plants and in offices, ensuring that medicines are arranged with whatever networking the group has to ensure that health insurance for COVID victims have been put in place. Health insurance schemes have been modified, fortunately, because we have Aditya Birla Insurance, which covers our insurance, to see that there are no caps on insurance costs, because many people have spent a lot more money than the insurance premiums really, provide for. So all these things have really helped considerably in managing the anxiety level, manage the nervousness that employees have. And I think we are really delighted that after a poor beginning, we ended the year quite well. And given the circumstances of the COVID and employee morale. And just to give you an instance, anecdotal incidents, we measure, we do these organizational health surveys. So we were doing it with Gallup for the last more than 10, 12 years. And we did one a couple of years ago, and we keep doing a dipstick. So we do the OHS every 2 years, and in every year we do a dipstick. We did a dipstick of our domestic textile business, 3 units spread across the country. And we were amazed to see that the vibe score, we call it vibes, the OHS, the vibe score had hit an all-time high. This was really very surprising to most of our people and also people in the group, because it is a very unlikely period to have vibe scores going up dramatically in a business which never had great vibe scores. And I think in a sense, it reflected really all the employee engagement initiatives we as a group had taken and rolled out. And it was very clear that it was not just implemented in letter, but it was also implemented in spirit. And therefore, it was felt by every employee. So I think that gives a strong sense of, purpose and a strong sense of commitment. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have more than answered it. And it's nice to know there are organizations, when it comes to reduction in cost, it is not at the expense of employees. And there are a lot of good things that the organization is doing and has done. Thank you for sharing with us. And let us hope and pray there are more such progressive organizations, then the world and the employees, then the world will become a better place for employees to work in. And you said about communication, which is the key. Yes, the employees should know where they stand and what the company is doing for them. Thanks for sharing this. COVID-19 is said to be a black swan event. Is it really a black swan event? A black swan event is something that hits you completely unexpectedly. Over the years, we have had various viruses waylaying us. So COVID-19 is just not so unexpected. Has it become a black swan event so that the powers be can insulate themselves from being held accountable?
You asked a very interesting question, and even at the cost of not being politically correct, I would say that it is a black swan event. It is a black swan event like no other event this world has experienced. And I'm sure you will realize that maybe in the last 3 or 4 generations, there has never been an event of this magnitude. You are right when you say that you had the HIV, you had the SARS virus, you had so many viruses that has afflicted the world. But if you notice these viruses were always limited in the geographical impact that it had. In fact, there was no virus that really went to the extent of becoming a global pandemic as this one has. Now, if you look at what this pandemic has done, this pandemic has brought the world to its knees. And, for the last many years, we all talked about globalization as being a great panacea to global economic growth and probably the only solution. And you know, the Davoses of the world, etc., became the Mecca for this initiatives. But you will see what are the pitfalls of globalization. You see, when people travel, and economic commerce is not limited to the national boundaries of your countries. And take my example. I mean, I'm running operations in 7 countries. I spend 20 days a month traveling. 20 days a month, I'm out of the country. I've actually spent very little time in Bombay, which is my headquarters. So, what am I doing really? I'm connecting with my people, I'm going to my plants, I'm reviewing my operations, I'm engaging with my employees, I'm doing town halls, and I'm connecting. And in this process, I'm actually traveling across the world. And therefore, the risk that the global pandemic actually brought got sort of accentuated by the challenge of globalization, the challenge of free commerce, the challenge of free travel to different parts of the world. And I can tell you, I have been working now for 39 years. I have never seen a world as we've seen in the last 2 years. You know, when Mr. Modi announced the 1 day stoppage, I thought it was an affront to civil liberties and our own freedom. When it became 1 week, it became worse. When it rolled into months, it became impossible. For a person who has never sat at home, even otherwise, it was a big, big change in my life. And therefore, you know, I can easily say that the black swan event of the COVID SARS-19 pandemic has, I think, made everything else that has happened globally in the past to be nothing but a mere shadow, including the 2008 financial meltdown. We have now seen a meltdown of the global economy. We've seen growth rates hitting a rock bottom. We've seen Indian economy having suffered probably the biggest jolt it has ever suffered in the last financial fiscal year. And you know, this V-shaped recovery that we were hoping for has also received a very big setback. As you can see, the second wave of the pandemic has hit the country even worse than the first wave. And nobody really knows when it will end, because the numbers in India are still very, very challenging and very, very frightening. The number of deaths have been hovering around 4,000 every day, officially, as per the statistics. So I think we are in a very difficult period of time. And I would say this will require not just the policymakers, but the community, the individual, the companies, to really put their best foot forward in the recovery process. And I think it is not going to be easy, but it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible. And therefore, I'm very hopeful that our people who are much more resilient today and people around the world will ensure that, you know, we are going to be able to come out of this and do everything possible to preserve our people, our relatives, our friends, our community. And you can see what this has done. You know, this is an amazing thing that has happened. The COVID pandemic has actually brought the whole world together.
Yes.
It has shown how interdependent the world is.
Yes.
Whether it's vaccine, whether it's technology for vaccines, whether it is medicines. And as you can see today, India is liberally importing concentrators and oxygen supplies from different parts of the world. It's liberally importing drugs. And, you know, it also exported a lot of things to neighboring countries. It shows how interdependent the world is. Secondly, it also shows how important is the role of the community. You would have realized, and I know Premraj, you are from Bombay, so you know how Bombay is. We sometimes live in a building for 10s and 20s of years without knowing our neighbors.
True.
And this is very unique to, let's say, cities like New York and Bombay, probably not to all cities. And it is one time that the communities, the societies have come together. They have formed their own laws. They formed their own ways of keeping their society safe and intact. Over and above the regulations issued by the state government as directives for lockdowns, it shows how communal concerted action has become the order of the day and has become the most important element to keep communities safe. So even the lockdown of a micro community or a microcosm has been done in the larger interest of public health for all individuals. So I think the sense of how important it's not only you or your company, but your community and the societies that give you license to operate, like all our plants, how important they become in the order of things has never been as evident and as clear as it is today during the pandemic. So I think these are some of the fallouts of the Black Swan event. I am very confident and hopeful that the world will emerge as a better world from it. But of course, it would be at the cost of a lot of misery, pain, and sadness for a lot of our friends and colleagues. I hope in some sense I've answered you.
Yes. Let's keep our fingers crossed and let's hope our resilience will take us through. Now let's get a bit personal. You have been conferred with a host of prestigious awards. Please talk about the ones that gave you the greatest pleasure and why.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, the awards are really a recognition of the work that my teams have done. And since they have to give the awards to somebody, they probably give it to the boss. So there have been some awards which have been more gratifying than the others. I think the first award, which I was not expecting and which I got in 2002 from the IIT Delhi, which is my alumni, as a distinguished alumni, was a very surprising development. And it was given for my work in nation building, in building the textile industry in India. And I was very, very honored, I was humbled, and I was really privileged to receive that award at an investiture ceremony in IIT Delhi. The second award, which gave me even greater pleasure, was receiving the coveted Outstanding Business Leader Award very early on in my stay in Aditya Birla Group. Many times I used to watch the annual Aditya Birla event, which is probably like the Oscars in the world context of events, and something which I don't think very many businesses, even around the world, including Fortune 500 companies, have. And when I used to see the people getting the most coveted award was the Outstanding Business Leader Award, I was very happy for them. But I noticed that the profile of these people were people who were nearing retirement and who had spent almost their lifetime in the group, contributing to the group in magnificent ways, virtually building businesses. So in 2004, when I received this award, I had been with the group only for 5 years. And I had, of course, turned around the pulp and fiber business. That is what Mr. Birla always acknowledged. And the pulp and fiber business, incidentally, was the cash cow for Aditya Birla Group. Every investment of ours in Southeast Asia and every investment in India also came from the money that this cash cow was generating. This business had gone into very difficult times in the mid-90s. And Mr. Birla brought me in 1999 to sort of turn around this business. And I think with the help of my colleagues, many brilliant people, my wonderful boss, and of course, Mr. Birla, who always was in touch with me through those period of 4-5 years, we actually resurrected this business to make it the global #1 in the world, even after BCG had advised us to exit this business. And today, of course, it continues to be a leading cash cow for the group and a global business as #1 in the world. So I think receiving an award at a fairly young age, at a young tenure in Aditya Birla Group, it was absolutely a surprise because I could never have expected. I would have probably thought another 10 years in the group or 15 years in the group, I would qualify for this award. But when I got it, it was really humbling, and it was really, it was it was in a sense a vindication of the kind of work that we did to turn around the business, especially in the face of very hostile competition of polyester. As you know, who are the polyester majors? I don't need to name them. And to ensure that we not only took back our share, but we grew, and we continued to grow for the last 2 decades at 2 times, 3 times the growth of polyester, that is viscose rayon, or viscose fiber as we call it, was a vindication of the work that the teams had done. And I think they justly deserved the award. I was just the figurehead. But it was very, very gratifying to receive the award. Then in the late 2000s and early 2010s, I received a number of awards for retail. And I joined the retail business in a very surprising move. I was one of the few whom I think Mr. Birla thought as a troubleshooter. And he sent me to all the tough operations of the company. He took me in to turn the pulp and fiber business around. He sent me to Karnataka, to one of our largest complexes, which was about to close down because of labor issues, environmental issues. We turned it around, made it to be one of the best companies in the world today. In fact, in terms of Gallup scores, it has the highest Gallup worldwide scores for a number of years. In fact, for the last 1 decade, it has probably turned out to be one of the best companies. And it's also the winner of the Aditya Birla's, probably one of the few Platinum Award winners for business excellence. So, and then to bring me back to manage pulp operations, and then suddenly in the midst of that operation, he moved me into retail business. I actually thought it was going to be the worst decision of my career, because I had neither FMCG experience. I had, of course, marketing and strategy experience. I had no experience of managing, a consumer business. And I told him, I said, this is like planned for failure. But he said, no, I think I have confidence that you will turn it around. So when I joined that business, it was in a very difficult phase. And like I said, I came from a zero base of knowledge. I used the next 4.5, 5 years to learn about retail. And this really meant, and I'm not kidding you when I say that I worked 365 days a year. I did not take a single day's break. I was working throughout those 4 years. If every weekend, which also was a holiday for me, I would be in some part of the world, in some part of India, in some store, in some state. It was a great learning. We opened more than 2,400 stores in a period of 18 to 20 months. You can imagine what that really means in terms of number of stores a day. Each store takes anywhere from 6 months to build. And these were all our stores, so they were not franchisee stores. And to build hypermarkets, which take years to build, was a great learning experience. Also to understand how to make retail successful in a country where modern retail was only hemorrhaging cash. And we hemorrhage cash too. So we were no exceptions. But how to reduce that and how to bring it to a manageable business was a great learning experience. So I would say that the awards that followed as the best retailer from many places, but most importantly, the Coca-Cola Retail Councils. I became a member of the Global Coca-Cola Retail Advisory Council. I received many Coca-Cola Retail Awards, which are given out in India to the best retailers. And the Asian Retail Congress Award is the best CEO of retail. These all were, in fact, only a confirmation on the hard work and the, almost I was doing 14 to 16 hour days and 365 days a year. And driving a brilliant team. So it was also very, very gratifying. And it was more gratifying to learn that a person, a rank outsider, would come into an industry and learn about the industry and become known in the industry as one of the 3 top people who understood retail business, let's say with, Nagesh, and Kishore, of very few, or Raghu Pillai, very few people had achieved that kind of recognition. And beyond the awards was the recognition that I was the chairman of CII's Retail Council for 4 years. I was the chairman of the CII's Marketing Council for 3 years. So I led CII's various councils, both for retail and marketing, for 7 years. I think that is unprecedented even till today. And it was very gratifying for me when Shunu Sen, as you know, the legendary advertiser and the great man of marketing, was the first chairman of the Marketing Council of CII. And I used to work with him when I was with Birla Cellulose. And he roped me into the council, which was in the early 2000s. So to lead that Marketing Council for a period of 3 terms was also very gratifying. Yes, I would say that what I took back from this is that there is no substitute for hard work, and there is no substitute for burning the midnight oil. There's no substitute for keeping yourself continuously engaged with your people and to learn. So 2012, when I left this industry, my hair was completely white. When I joined this industry, my hair was completely black. I didn't lose my hair, fortunately. I still have it on my head, but I really grayed, because those 4 or 5 years were almost equivalent to 10, 15 years of effort in a normal industry that would have. So yeah, so these were some of the recognitions which have been very gratifying in the career that I've had.
Thanks for sharing this. Hard work pays, and burning the candle at both ends really has given you rich dividends. And it was nice of you to acknowledge your team. Not too many people do that. My last question to you before I hand it over to Deepak. What's the legacy you would like to leave behind?
I don't know whether you have seen my video on YouTube and LinkedIn on purpose of life and what is the true meaning of success. Over the years, and particularly since I became a coach and I went through the coaching process with ICA of the US, I realized that there is a true success is not these rewards or recognition. The true success is not the amount of power that you control, or the position that you reach, or the kind of, in terms of, it's really true success and true purpose of life is not to accumulate material wealth. It's not to accumulate capital assets. It's not to worry about what is the kind of car you drive or what kind of home you stay in, or what kind of other status symbols that you crave for, maybe early on in life. But true purpose of life is really how can you touch the lives of thousands of people yourself. So to me, I understood in the last 5, 6 years that the true purpose of life really is not about what you achieve. It is what you can help others achieve in life. So I do a lot of work. I speak a lot. I engage a lot in many forums. Particularly if you'll see through the pandemic, you'll see that whether it's CII, whether it's FICCI, whether it's ASSOCHAM, whether it's any international body, whether it's World Business Council of Sustainable Development, of which I'm one of the co-chairs. I have tried my best to communicate what is the way in which people should respond. And I've also noticed that, over the last almost 10, 15 years, because of the fact that I've been in jobs where I had large number of employees, I had almost 15, 16,000 employees even in retail, working when I was the managing director. I realized that, no matter who the person is, no matter what level he comes from, it could be the housekeeping staff, it could be the store staff, it could be a liftman in our factory, it could be anyone, it could be a worker on the basic machines. you got to ensure that you give dignity and respect to everyone who does, and you do your best to help them. So over the years, I have been getting, for instance, even in LinkedIn, what I do, I respond to every message that comes to me. And as you know, in LinkedIn, given my profile, I get hundreds of messages asking me to help people with jobs. I try to respond to each one of them, and I try my best to help people, even though maybe even if I'm not hiring, I use the network that I was able to generate as chairman of CII for donkey's years to reach out to a very large stakeholder group and help people in in whatever way I can. So whether it is in my own companies to ensure that when somebody is sick or um, somebody is unwell or somebody's family is unwell, I have made it a point that irrespective of the fact that he's a workman or an officer or a CEO or whatever, I reach out to every individual and I make sure that my company HR teams and IR teams do whatever they can for an employee in need. So I think my legacy would be that at least the people whose life I touched, if they were benefited in some small way, I would consider that I contribute.
That's a noble thought, touching the lives of individuals with dignity. Thank you for sharing that. Now I request Deepak to take it forward, please.
Thank you, Premraj. And sorry, I joined in a little late. I was there in another meeting where I got a chance to address 1,000 plus individuals online. Thomas was talking about the VUCA world, how things have changed. This is my 36th co-hosting option and opportunity along with Premraj, and we are talking to Thomas. Despite being confined to our room, we are reaching out to so many more people across the world, touching lives and being able to change lives. So the Black Swan event has actually helped a lot of us. If this Black Swan wouldn't have happened, I'm not too sure I would have been able to address 1,000 people in a physical hall in a physical meeting. So Black Swans happen and they change lives. For some, obviously, for make it difficult, some people have lost their lives, and there is not a single person you speak to who hasn't lost a near or dear one. The second wave has really, really been harsh upon all of us. And I've been listening to what Thomas has been saying for so long. Before I move ahead, I have this announcement to make for everybody who is over here. Bloom World is coming up with 2 programs. One is on employee engagement and management, a roundtable on HR, which is going to be hosted by our very own KV Premraj. Saturday, 29th May, 5:30 to 6:30, an event not to be missed. I'm sure Thomas will also be joining us, and we will be able to use a little bit of his gray hair and gray matter, tickle that and get more ideas about how deeper we can engage our employees. The second program is Self-Care Simplified. It's a panel discussion in association with Reach Out to share the best practices in professional and personal space, which helps in balancing the physical, mental, and social health. The pandemic has really, really made life difficult for a lot of people, especially as far as the mental and their social aspect is concerned. So this is one program where on the 30th, that is next Sunday, 5 to 6 p.m., for an hour, we will be talking to experts who will help us make better sense of what to do when this pandemic is happening, how to be in a better mental, physical, and social state. Having said that, I want Thomas, as I said, to use all his expertise, his gray matter and the gray hair, and the CEO award which he has got. Thomas, today, if you were the CEO of an airline or a CEO of a hotel, global hotel company, seeing with what is happening, what would you have done? And logically, what would you have done different?
Firstly, thank you, Deepak. It's really a pleasure to be with you. And I knew you would start throwing googlies at me from the first ball itself. And a very difficult question. You know, one can pontificate on various things when it's easy to manage. But as you rightly mentioned, the two industries you've talked of, one is airline and one is the entertainment or the hotel business. Both have taken the biggest beatings in this pandemic. As you know, travel and mobility is something, it's like we've lost our liberties for travel, the freedom to travel. There are so many constraints on travel. And it's not just the constraints, it's also the risks involved in travel, the incumbent risks in travel. So I would say, and travel is very close to my heart because my son is a commander. He's a pilot with Indigo Airlines. And I'm always worried when he goes on a flight, but I know that he has to do his job. And if I was to be a CEO of a hotel chain, I would really be hard pressed today to see what I should do. So I think really the way the travel industry has managed the recovery of the airline business, and particularly in India, because, you know, at least till the month of April, I was traveling quite unhindered, taking all the precautions. I thought that the way the Airport Authority of India and the Indian Airlines rose to the task of giving confidence to passengers that they were traveling in a safe environment was pretty humongous. The fact that they were able to get a lot of digital technology in use to ensure touch-free boarding passes, luggage tags, ensuring that people's temperatures were monitored, the kind of scanners that were used, the fact that they had at every nook and cranny in the airport a sanitizer placed for people who were not carrying their own sanitizers. And the fact that they made it mandatory for you to wear the face mask and the face shield, I thought were wonderful steps to bring back confidence in travel. And I must compliment the airline industry for doing this. And the fact that in keeping with the slow lifting of lockdown, that they were able to bring back flights in various sectors, I think was a step in the right direction. They did things which were not very pleasant, which you may not be aware of. My son has suffered a salary cut like all his other colleagues for a very long period of time. And the cuts still continue. And they also obviously froze hiring. So, you know, the hundreds of pilots who came out were sitting on the bench with CPL licenses are still unemployed. And that's very tough for them and their families, particularly families which do not have the means to spend so much money, because making a pilot is a very expensive proposition. So I would say that the airlines have done the right thing. You know, many airlines around the world, you know, they tried out different experiments. You know, Singapore Airlines tried to do a flight to Australia, just a flight and to come back. They tried to do flights just to get people to entertain them in the aircraft itself.
Yeah.
But many of these did not really work. But I would say that the tremendous work done by Air India and by many of the other airlines to bring back stranded passengers, Indian passengers, and to take back stranded passengers of foreign origin back to their countries was also a great step. And the fact that whether you know, because I travel through airports a lot, the kind of steps that the Airport Authority of India took in the process of entering the airport, doing your check-in, doing your, you know, final boarding, also going to the lobby and the lobby areas to eat. You would see, interestingly, even in the lounge, they did not serve buffet food. They gave you dry food and they served it at your table in a package. So I think, you know, all around there was a lot of effort to do this. Coming to the hotel business, I think a lot of hotel businesses, because of the fact that they were under various regulations not to run, The hotels ran. Many of the hotels were converted into COVID facilities,
Yes.
possibly by the governments and the municipal corporations of respective states. They had a very tough time. But even they innovated. They came out with packages. I don't know how many of you know that the Taj was actually giving out rooms for 3,000 rupees for a
Yes.
long, long time, and they probably still are. Practically every big hotel chain in the country became like a place for people to go and spend 4-5 days or a week. It became affordable. You can't think of going to Grand Hyatt and staying there for 3,000 rupees.
Yeah.
4,000 rupees. Normally the rack rate is 12,000 rupees or 15,000 rupees, including the Taj. So I think they did a lot of innovation. They also went into home deliveries in many cases. The bakeries became not just a bakery for the hotel, but for bakeries for many other, many other occasions. The COVID kind of forcible conversion was a concern, which they had to manage because they had COVID patients and they had non-COVID patients. How to manage a hotel with limited availability of, let's say, serving cuisines, because not all restaurants in every hotel was working. Because, as you know, the biggest casualty of the hotel industry was a lot of the mobile labor, which all had to go back home when they closed down in the first phase. Many of them never came back. And therefore, staffing was a very big concern. I remember staying in a hotel where I was the only one at breakfast every day in the month of March in Bangalore. I was the only one. And I would wonder why there were not too many attendants. And then I realized that it didn't make sense to have too many attendants. The hotel couldn't afford it. It would not be profitable. But everything that they did to make you feel comfortable, just like the airlines did, to make you feel that your beds are sanitized, that your room is sanitized, that the food is served in such a manner that you can ensure that even the plates that you are using are sanitized. So I think a lot of confidence building measures took place by both these industries. And I think while they're obviously not in the best shape, but I think it is a part of recovery that they would have to go through, given the kind of industries they represent. But I think they have been fighting with the government to get everything opened. And believe me, even the period that they did open between, I would say, October, November to March, I used to frequent them very often. And I never had any fear that I'm going to get infected, because they did take precautions. They did maintain social distancing norms. They did whatever they could. I'm a music lover, so I go to watch music almost every day if I can, to watch live bands. And that's my life. So my daughter is a singer-songwriter in India. And so for me, music was very important. And I used to go to bars and I used to go to restaurants and I would go to any place where they had live music. And I never felt that I was going to come back with COVID or I was threatened. Of course, people used to think I was foolish, but I still managed, because I told you, I don't know, you were not here when I said I used to travel 20 days a month. For me, closeted inside the house for 4 months without stepping out between the period April to July was one of the most difficult periods of my life. I couldn't deal with it. So.
Yeah, March, April, and May this year has just been deja vu. What is happening today is exactly what was happening 1 year earlier. Thank you.
In fact, the coincidence of the dates is pretty unnerving,
Yes. So, there were questions asked about aviation.
I hope I answered your question, Deepak.
I know it's a difficult question to answer, but considering your experience and all the awards, I wanted just to have your view. We have seen difficult times for aviation and hospitality post 9/11, post SARS. We have seen difficult times, but the sector is such that there is resilience, and with government help, it tends to bounce back. So, and as you said, you were traveling for 20 days a year. If you are a traveler, if you are somebody who loves to travel, nothing will hold you back. If there is an airline connection, one will tend to fly.
Yeah, but I must tell you that, in addition to what I said, all these industries have used technology. They have also used a lot of digital marketing. They have, in fact, the use of digital marketing by all these industries have increased tenfold or 20-fold in the last couple of years. In the last, I would say exactly 20 months, 22 months, these industries have received a complete fillip. As you know, the food serving restaurant, whether it's a Swiggy app or whatever, these are rocking today because food delivery is also being made safe and given a lot of confidence to people. So I think, optimization or right sizing to get your cost right was one side, but use of technology, use of new opportunities of innovation has also been used by this industry. And I would say that's a road to recovery. That's and you use one right word. The biggest learning for us as leaders is that the greatest strength you got to bring to this table now is resilience and adaptability. And I think that we see in abundance today. And I think that's really what gives you a lot of hope that because we have become more resilient and we have become more adaptable and we have become more agile.
Yes.
Agility is a lot more than just speed.
Yes.
And all this comes with under the umbrella of a certain quantum of governance and guidelines and regulations and restrictions. And I think it's very commendable that these industries have made progress and have survived. Maybe many haven't survived, and one feels sorry for it. But I guess understanding the change of technology, understanding how to use the limited opportunities with innovation and creativity, how to ensure that you are agile to pick up the insights and foresights of what consumers are looking at next, and be there the first in go to market is going to be the recipe for success going forward.
Yeah. Now you've been a CEO of different companies at different points in your life, and I would like to have your views on this. Every company has got a CSR budget. There are companies which are having hundreds of crores lying in their CSR account. Do you think companies are doing enough first to spend that CSR and spend that CSR on the right activity? Is that happening?
See, Deepak, I think it's a very good question. And I can only talk about what my experience has been. So I will not even hazard to talk about what others do. The Aditya Birla Group takes its CSR activity very, very seriously. And there's a reason for that. We believe that the license to operate for us, we call it the social license to operate, comes from our communities that we serve. And having worked in a particular plant in the interiors of India, I can tell you that the amount of work we do in the communities is mind-boggling. Just to give you a headline, and I may be a little off in the numbers, today the Aditya Birla Group, through its CSR, serves a population of more than 5 million people. And we have about easily, I can't be sure of the numbers, but we certainly have about 70, 80 units. And all these units are in backward areas. They're surrounded by villages. They're surrounded by small communities around them. So the focus of our CSR has always been education, health, self-help groups to create independent working. Health, of course, includes a number of things. It includes not just health camps, specialty health camps, artificial limbs, actually going, the ambulance actually doing a recce every week by villages, goes to 2, 4, 5 villages. A doctor is on board, an occupational health person is on board. We actually ensure that villages around at least a radius of 5 to 10 kilometers from the plant get the benefit of the best kind of medical health we can impart. So, and the self-help groups are, I think, the pride for us. When we see, and a lot of the self-help groups are women groups. So we have taken on women empowerment years before, this became fashionable to talk about. So I think the work that we do in communities around basic things like health, education, infrastructure, self-help groups to make people independent is we have a review, we have you must be aware that all boards have to have a CSR subcommittee. And the subcommittee meetings are so serious that if you've not spent your money, the directors take you to task. And therefore, it is now understood that you have to spend every bit of that money that comes into your kitty for CSR. And in fact, you are pulled up if you don't. And it is very important to see, of course, that these CSR activities are directed in the way in which our overall CSR policies are built. So Mrs. Rajshri Birla herself is the chairperson of our CSR activity. And I think the amount of work the ABG group has done around India and in Southeast Asia is simply commendable. In fact, just to tell you, I run a Aditya Birla Knowledge Center in Thailand. It's the most amazing center anyone will come across. I have got in that center about 6 vocational streams training, from sewing to tailoring to electrical gadgets to computer learning to making candles and bags, which is the general industry profession. I mean, we have about 6 or 7 streams. And in the last 10-15 years, we have educated and trained and skilled more than 6,000 to 8,000 Thai citizens to become independent and to earn their own livelihood. And this is supported by the government of Saraburi, which is the province in which I operate, one of my plants. So it's not just in India, but across the world, we've taken the CSR activities very seriously. And to answer your questions, I think all good corporates are doing that. I mean, I know of many good groups which are doing that, but there will be many who don't. And certainly the MSMEs are ones which probably give it a short shrift, maybe because of their limited budgets, etc. But I think the pandemic itself would have taught us to be more giving, to be more caring, and to give back to the community. And I'm hopeful that in the coming years, the CSR utilization will receive a flip in India too, even with the small and medium enterprises.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. At least you get a sense that these big companies, these big corporates are not just big in name, they are big hearted. There is everything which is being done to see to it that the employee, their families, nature, the support system, the full community is taken care of. So good to know. By the way, Payal, as soon as travel opens up, we should organize one Bloomberg meeting in Thailand along with Thomas in that community, that center which he is running over there.
It will be a pleasure for me to do it. And of course, you are all invited to visit it because it's really gratifying.
Thank you so much.
The Prime Minister visited India, he went and visited this place.
Yeah. Also, I can confirm, and I don't know whether Premraj has mentioned this or not, Thomas, even before we officially announced that Thomas would be gracing the Broom platform on Sunday, we started receiving registrations that people are interested. In fact, you as a guest have received more registrations than all the guests which we have had on the show. So thank you, Thomas, for being here. It's a Sunday afternoon. We are already 75 minutes into this program. It is nearing lunchtime. We would love to have this conversation keep on going on. But what I would do is, there are 41 people in the room. So if there is anybody who would like to ask a question directly to Thomas, please unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, Deepak. Can I take the opportunity?
Sure. Bhavna, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I was actually watching this session on FB, but I found it so interesting that I logged into Zoom to interact with Thomas.
Lovely.
Yeah, I gained a lot of insights and value from your experience, Thomas. And and my question to you is that before my question, one more thing. I've had an opportunity to work with one of your group companies very closely in Malaysia called Pan Century. So I understand your culture, your workings very well, and hats off to your group. Now, coming to my question, see, the pandemic has been brutal. It's ripped carnage throughout economies, sectors, and especially for working mothers, a third of whom say that they are considering leaving the workforce or maybe even downshifting their careers. And one of the culprits is the double shift, the eternal burden of working mothers that has gotten worse during this pandemic. So, what is your advice to such women, and what are the measures that good companies should consider for this section of their workforce? Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavna. I think very nice questions. And yeah, you're right. We had pan-century olefins, but we divested those units many years ago.
That's right.
Happy to know that you were part of our group at that point in time. I think, you are right. The pandemic has been brutal. It has not spared anyone. And it has affected everyone, rich or poor, but obviously it's affected the poor much badly, much more, intensely. Coming to women, I would be happy to tell you that we, at least as a group, ensured remote working. And we, in fact, even when the lockdowns were lifted, we left it completely discretionary to an employee, particularly given his or her situation, whether to come to office or not to come to office, if they had parents or children or youngsters with comorbidities. We encourage people to stay safe. We encourage all our employees to stay safe, including saying that anyone who had to depend on public mobility and infrastructure may also stay home, because we don't want you to run the risk of getting infected. So I think it would really depend upon the kind of group we are dealing with. I'm happy to tell you that for the last 2 years or so, our focus on increasing diversity in our workforce has taken an absolute, it's gone up tangentially. We are trying to recruit more and more women. So I certainly would not like to hear that women are wanting to leave the workforce, because we are wanting to deploy more and more women in our workforces, including in the plants, including in shifts, which is a change which has happened in the last couple of years. And I think we've come out with a lot of enabling policies for working women, working from home also, to ensure that they don't have to bear the burden of the double shift, as you rightly mentioned. But again, I can't really say that what ABG does is par for the course for the rest of the country. I wish it would be, but maybe not very progressive companies and groups may not be doing all of this. But I think in times to come, this will become essential, because the pandemic has changed the way we work, has changed the way we work and we live. And I think hybrid working and a lot of remote working will become the order of the day. In a sense, giving some support to working women, because while we all understand people who are working, that working from home doesn't mean you work less. In fact, on the contrary, people end up working more.
Yes.
Please save yourself that 1 or 2 hours that you are traveling. You also save yourself all the other, preparatory time that you waste every day getting to work and coming back. But it doesn't mean life gets easier. But progressive companies are mindful of this, are mindful of not just the financial, but also the emotional impact on their employees. And they are we are coming out with a lot of new policies, which probably will make a lot of remote working more facilitative in the years to come. So I hope, Bhavna, I've answered your question. So
yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. You very well answered. And it's very, very heartening to know that you are encouraging more and more women to take active role in workforce in your organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, Thomas, Bhavna is a part of the Bloom Advisory Board, and she is an accomplished leader and an expert in the corporate space. So I mean, once you actually get to meet her, I mean, this just the depth of experience that Bloom has, is just commendable and remarkable. So thank you for asking that question, Bhavna.
Thank you, Deepak. Thanks a lot for those kind words.
Thank you, Bhavna, for asking this.
Sir, can I
Thomas,
ask?
I have
Deepak, I'd
a
like to, sorry, carry on. Pam.
so thank you very much. Gratitude for gracing Bloom platform. And my question to you is, what is your next big goal?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm still on the. Sorry. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Because my box has gone from the screen.
We can.
I think, I've already alluded to this in my video on YouTube on the purpose of life and the definition of success. So I think, my future plans would be to continue to touch as many lives as I can, to help people out as much as I can. I have a lot of interest in music, with my daughter being one of India's leading singer-songwriters. So I would like to get involved in music, help a lot of people, young musicians whom I already am in touch with, a large number of young musicians who are struggling. The COVID has not been easy on them. So really work in the area of music, work in the area of helping people, start a little bit of my coaching and mentoring practice. But I still got a few years to go before I step onto that. And more importantly, to try and help everyone who reaches out to me. I'm very active on the LinkedIn. Many of you who follow me will know that. I've got hundreds and hundreds of posts on LinkedIn. So anyone who's interested can go and see the posts. They're all relevant to leadership, to COVID times, to coaching, to mentoring. I also am very active on the Instagram. So I'm a cook. I call myself an aspiring master chef. So I like to cook. I put out a lot of cookery things on my Instagram.
Wow.
All these things are. I'm also a bartender, so all the guys who love a good drink. Bartending.
Payal, I'm telling you, we are going to enjoy in Thailand.
We will definitely love to have food with your cooking. And it has been the most endearing talk till now. So far, so many speakers have graced Bloom platform. Yours was the most endearing talk. And I salute your solidarity, Thomas G. and Mr. Billa. Thank you so much. And thank you, beautiful audience, for being here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Thank you.
Eric, go ahead.
Can I?
Eric, go ahead.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Hello?
Yes, first, Eric. Yes. We'll give everybody a chance. We are on.
Since
We are
I've
live.
been,
We'll give everybody.
since I've been given a chance, Thomas, I'll bung in 3 quick questions, and they are emanating out of your comments and the questions. The first one is on there's micro, there's corporate, and there's a macro question. The micro was, when you talked about the people, or rather Bhavna, about especially women who have to, the double shift thing, they're working from home. Yes, they have a benefit that they do not have to travel. But I was just looking, from their point of view, is the company corporates making up to them because they are paying rent in their own homes and a certain square footage willy-nilly most of the day is being allocated almost free, I would say, to the corporates, and I think it is very unfair. Similarly, it's not to me, it's not a joking matter, because when I multiply it by thousands of people, I think there is a big, I won't call it a miss sort of balance there, where both interests have to be balanced out. And the person is paying for Wi-Fi, the person has paid for his laptop, he's taking time away in between, and all of that. So I think maybe possibly a stipend or something, maybe you're already doing it, you might wish to clarify. So that was the micro question. The corporate question is, as a professional who has been in marketing and public relations and such things, we always, these things are supposed to be questioned when things are tough. Instead of increasing the marketing budget or the advertising budget, people say, let's save money and stuff like that. This question was on the public relations part of it. In the CSR work that is done, you're spending crores of rupees, you're affecting, 80, 100, 200 towns and small villages and communities, and you are doing good. the principle in PR is do good and be seen to be doing good, right? Because that will enable your social license to carry on. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did the tree actually fall? In other words, if you're doing the good work, does the most corporates they sort of look at which programs can also have a good PR fallout, or is it, look, we got money on our business from these various stakeholder and communities, and it doesn't matter whether we get the credit or not. We will just put that first thing first, and what is best for that community, whether we get some PR mileage out of it or not. So that was the second corporate question. The third question is a macro thing, and it leans into your experience as a thought leader at CII. You know, in the question when there are big, you know, like the pandemic, it's happened before that the world and the corporate world and governments have been faced with really disruptive situations. In 2008, that happened. The government then bails out the Lehman Brothers and the banking industry, who are the main culprits actually, you know, who have augmented the pace of the problem. So would it be a good idea, for instance, for the government? It's a philosophical thing. Do you give them tax credits to the aviation, the hospitality business, etc.? Or do you, like Adam Smith and the other laissez-faire people say, let it fall where it falls, let people consolidate, let them merge, let them do whatever is necessary, because that is in the natural competitive, manner of things. So how much do we support, or how much do we allow things like what both Deepak and you said, that we need to have resilience, we need to have this jugaad mentality that we have in India, the ability to have, adaptability, to be able to work it through without the hand holding and the cushioning that the government will be very happy to provide, because it's not its own funds, it just dips into the public exchequer and bails these people out. Not a good idea where the layman people, such people are actually contributing. Here, that's not the case. Here it is entirely lies at the blame is at the pandemic level. But I'd like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Can I know who asked this question? Eric Martin. Is it?
Yes. Sir.
Yes.
Eric, it is a very long question probes, but I'm going to give you short answers.
Thank you.
The first, you said women in the workplace who are working from home, and whether you should look at some SOPs, or you used the term real estate, or
no, I meant a stipend, some kind of a stipend.
No. You talked about the space that they utilize.
Yes.
I'm putting it in very business-like terms.
Sure.
I'm very sure that there is all progressive companies, and I know a lot of the IT industry companies have already provided for support in terms of IT hardware infrastructure, IT software infrastructure at the workplaces. So many companies are doing it. Many progressive companies are doing it. In addition to things like if there's a caregiver need for privilege leave or medical leave, if somebody is unwell due to COVID. So a lot of things have happened, and I'm sure the progressive companies will continue to look at the employee benefits, looking at, let's say, we'll call these COVID benefits, because like I told, if you heard what I said, we've expanded the insurance premiums. We are allowing people to top up to twice the amount. And we are saying, even if it exceeds that, we'll still bear the burden as a good corporate, considering that it's really denting the employees in this very hard time. So so a lot of things are happening. Then you asked about PR. I'm sorry, the group has a very different philosophy. The group believes that what you give with the right hand should not be known by the left hand. So
wonderful.
Interested in PR publicity for the work that we do in CSR. But suffice to tell you that every prestigious award of this country, year after year has been going to Aditya Birla Group for CSR. This is quiet work, now covering maybe 5-6 million people. And I think, I don't think really PR is what is important there. What is important is what do the people, the beneficiaries feel about what work is being done, and that is tracked and feedback is obtained. And our CSR initiatives do get tweaked if we feel that the beneficiaries are looking at some other kind of activities or sectors for us to invest money in. Coming
So
to
that was my point. You do have some metrics where you'd be
Oh,
able to
yes,
see.
yes, of course. We have a very structured CSR
Right.
process. And-
Maybe the Gallup poll or some kind of similar kind of
Oh,
thing. that
yes,
you-
the Gallup
Right.
poll is done, like I said, every 2 years by us.
Right.
And it's fed back into the system. And the third issue, Eric, which you talked about is a little more complicated because I think, since I run businesses in many countries, I know what
Yes.
is the difference in the government approach in different countries.
Yes.
Just to tell you that in Europe, I was given 75% of my workers' wages by the government of Germany and the government of Slovakia,
Wow.
subject to certain conditions, right? But this is not the case in India. In India, I'm sorry to say, it's a lot of Hawa talk, and beneficiaries have not really got the benefit, including on the financial side, when we talked about moratoriums of loans and deferment of payments, particularly by the stressed industry. And you're right. I think it is time for the government to think of a recovery package which could include even tax breaks to the most affected sectors. So I'm trying to
My
answer-
question was whether CII, being the premier industry institution, is actively doing it, because there's no point in doing it after the event. It should be done right from now. It should give the right signal out from government to industry that when hard times are there, we are not just going to take a pound of flesh without giving it back when it's needed. So that it's a long-term thing, because if they sustain these industries now, they will be even bigger taxpayers later on. So
Yeah.
that was,
I think that's a very good suggestion, Eric. Unfortunately, I'm no longer involved with CII for the last 2-3 years, but I am involved with ASSOCHEM now. I'm the
Yes.
chairman of one of their councils. And I can tell you that, and I'm sure that whether it is CII, FICCI or ASSOCHEM, which are the 3 leading councils of India, are completely in tune with what you're saying. And they've been reaching out to the government continuously to support particularly the stressed industries. And I'm very sure that CII is doing it, though I'm not part of it. But I know that at ASSOCHEM, we are going to the government with all these representations, because they're still only an advisory and an advocacy body.
True.
They can't get the government to actually implement anything unless the government wants to do it. And I already told you what is the kind of support that other governments around the world have given to their respective industry, both large, small, and medium. So I hope I've answered your questions, Eric.
yeah.
Rabia had-
My point on that was, Thomas, is that, you have the evidence, you have the fact that other governments are doing it. So we need to do a bloody good marketing job with the government, saying that here is the evidence, this is how it is helping. And, it is maybe a lack of, capability or selling ability on the behalf of FICCI, ASSOCHEM, and CIA. If they cannot turn some head rounds, and, put the squeeze on, because, industry does contribute to government in many ways. So there should be a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
So
I think that's well said,
that
Eric.
was all.
and
I
I-
just think we need to do a better selling job as industry to get it done.
Sure, I'm sure that they should do that. You're right.
Rabia had raised her hand. Rabia, if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself. Otherwise, Dr. Rao.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rabia. I'm working with ABG Group. As earlier Thomas has said that women empowerment, and just experience the things in the ABG Group, which is wonderful. My question is what are the mistakes and failures, which is from you learn lots of things at your teenage? So just because right now I'm a new joinee in the ABG. So what are the mistakes you done, and from which, what are the lessons you take it from that?
Thank you, Rabia. I think I've made a lot of mistakes throughout my life. Maybe continue to make mistakes, but I think the first mistake would be that unlike many other people fortunate than me, I didn't really pursue my passion. My passion is I was a cricketer, and I used to play for Cooch Behar at a schoolboy level. But after having joined IIT, I gave up cricket, whereas my school friends, many of them went on to play for India. Many of them went on to play for India in cricket at a national level. So,
Wow.
so I would say that yes, maybe one of my regrets is that I didn't pursue my passion. But work that I've been doing over the years has become my passion now, and helping people has become my passion. But I'm envious of my children who are pursuing their passion, and I'm very proud of them. My son is a computer engineer who, after he completed, had a job with TCS, wanted to join, didn't ever want to do a 9-to-5 job. He told me he wants to become a pilot, which was a shock to me. In fact, I almost fell off my chair when he said that, because I never realized that that was his passion in life. And I'm so proud of him today. He's probably one of the best pilots that Indigo has. He's a line training captain. He's a commander. His next aspiration is to become a simulator instructor. And I'm quite sure he'll get there too. And my daughter is a singer-songwriter, one of India's leading English singer-songwriters, also sings for Bollywood. She also, I thought, would take on a regular MBA career after her economic and stats honors in Stevens, but in Xavier, sorry, not Stevens, in Xavier's, but she never did that. She pursued rather her dream of becoming a singer-songwriter. And she's a good one, and I hope she will become, she will realize her own potential and her dreams in the years to come. So I would say, Rabia, follow your passion, whatever it is. That's my only advice to you.
Wonderful. Dr. Rao.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thomas Varghese, sir, it is pleasure listening to you. I have one question. You said you have seen the developments of infrastructure in China. Please share your views on the same in India, where India could be in the next 20 years, and what India should do or focus to reach that #1 spot in the world. Thank you.
Mr. Jagannathan, you asked a question on which a lot of people have a lot of different views. I remember many times listening to headline news of some politician or the other saying that we will make Mumbai into Shanghai or Qingdao, whatever. Frankly, nobody really understands the effort the Chinese have done. I remember when I was doing my search for my partner for joint venture or for acquisition, everyone told me, China is only Shanghai, Beijing, Qingdao, and Guangzhou. Every other part of China is backward. But believe me, as I traveled through China, the kind of infrastructure I saw, you will not believe that most of China's hinterland is connected by concrete roads. That is why it explains why the Chinese cement companies are the largest in the world, because that's the amount of concrete they consume. The roads are fabulous. The airports, even the smallest airport is bigger than the biggest airports we have. And this I'm talking about knowledge of 6, 7, 8 years ago, because in the last couple of years, I've not been traveling as often to China as I normally was. So I think, frankly, given the kind of political environment, given the kind of corruption, given the kind of lack of priority, it is very difficult for India to emulate China. And, fortunately, the late Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, tried to do something on the roads, but, again, it went into cold freeze. And I think, to me, I personally believe that a country is built with advanced investment in infrastructure. And, it's like putting the horse before the cart, it's this whole dilemma that do we have the money to invest in this, and are we doubtful about the investment? To me, infrastructure is an economic multiplier like no other.
Yes. Yes.
I think Indian governments, successive Indian governments, have not invested in infrastructure as they ought to have. And when I say infrastructure, I mean roads to begin with, ports, trains, airports, water. These are the kind of investment that Indian government needs to do in terms of infrastructure. And frankly, people have different views, but every time I went to China, I saw a new China. And every time I come back to Bombay, I see the same Bombay for the last 30 years. And I don't think we will ever catch up with them. I don't even think we should even think that we will do. We'll never catch up. That's my firm belief as a China watcher.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
As honest as one can be, Premraj, closing comments to you. Before that, if Abhijit wants to say something, because Abhijit was the person who introduced us to Thomas Verghese. So Abhijit, if you are around, if you want to say something, otherwise Premraj can go for the closing comments.
Thank you, Thomas, for great to hear you. I think it was wonderful. My just one question is, now that, in fact, I have not traveled for the last 15 months. I used to continuously go around for, not globally, but yes, continuously around the country. And now with the work from home environment or remote location working and adapting to it, and others also adapting, at a certain point of time, I feel whether all the travel which I did and I was away from my family, whether it was worth it or whether that was needed. But so what's your view on that? Because you've traveled more extensively than me. Maybe I travel maximum a week, a month, but since you've been 3 times more and all around the globe. So what's your take on that? And will in future, do you think you could be traveling so much when it opens?
I think it's a very good question. It's a very good insight, Abhijit. Firstly, thank you for bringing me onto the platform because I owe it to you. Thank you so much for it. I think you're right. There will definitely be an introspection on whether the kind of travel that we did pre-pandemic was really required. But I would say this is very, very different for different individuals. And
Agree.
very different for the way we operate. I am a guy who operates very much at a you can very crudely say at a physical level. That means I like to meet my people. I like to meet my workmen in the factory. I like to go around the plant. There are many people who never go into their plants, who never visit their machines, who never meet the workmen so it will really depend upon the kind of person. But yes, reflecting on what we have gone through, which is a once in a lifetime experience, I'm very sure a lot of us will pull back on travel, will cut back on travel, will put a kind of filter to say, is this really required? Is this something I really need to do? And definitely the frequencies will come down. And you're right. And a lot of travel mobility will reduce for sure, because you're still not sure whether you're safe. That's another big uncertainty. But at the same time, the learnings of the last 2 years will sit very heavily on us to say that, really, do I need to do this? Can I do it virtually? And therefore, the world will never be the same again after this pandemic lifts eventually. The way of working will change, and the way in which we run companies will change. Everything will change.
Maybe family travel will pick up. Abhijit, you can now travel with family every year. Every year go for a cruise, or every year go for an international trip with your family. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Great.
Thank you.
And thanks for gracing this. Yeah.
Mr. Thomas, what has been your experience with employee engagement in China?
That's another googly. I will say that
I know
employees are not really different in different parts of the world. But I'll just tell you one insight we have. This company that I acquired in 2006, this company struggled for many years. And as you know, our culture always has been that we always have some expatriate leaders running the businesses. And we had that there too. And most of the time it's leading Indian managers who get this coveted role. But we were in for a surprise when in a change, we actually moved to a complete Chinese management. And very strangely, the guy who used to do the interpretation for me, who is my interpreter when I was doing the deal in 2005-06, became the unit head, and he ran a complete Chinese management outfit. The company's performance just shot through the roof. Every filter, every KPI, every matrix changed dramatically for that company. So I think the only learning I can take from that is that there is different ways to motivate different cultural teams, and maybe they found the sweet spot there, and maybe getting an all Chinese team was the answer, which we were awaiting for a long time. But I'm not sure whether it's universally applicable, but that was our experience. So you asked me for my experience, that is our experience.
Yeah, because all of us are very curious about China.
I'll
Thank
just
you
ask-
very much for your answer.
I would like to ask an ancillary question, Thomas, if I may, and it is to this concept, because you're a global leader of businesses having to deal with, not just China, but in China particularly, this concept that everybody has heard about, which is guanxi, that you require, the local guy and, the local contact, and you must have hand holding with them. How much was that actually in your thing? And is it something that new companies or, people who want to enter into those territories, Asian territories, can they work around that, or is it inescapable that you must factor in guanxi in your corporate training?
See, Eric, first and foremost, the language is a very big barrier.
Yes.
You must understand that you go into a meeting with 10 people and you don't have a clue about what they're talking amongst themselves or what they're really feeling, saying, or thinking.
Yes.
So the language is a very, very crucial barrier to proper trade or partnerships. So if you have a Chinese speaking team with you, then you can even think of going it alone. But without a Chinese speaking team, which is your team,
Yes.
you cannot even think of doing a business in China. And you're right, for years together. And when we started off, we had a joint venture. So we had the Chinese partner very much with us to deal with the government and the provincial governors and so on and so forth. So yes, it was always felt, I haven't done any deal in the last couple of years, but it was always felt that having a China contact in the deal is very crucial. I'm not sure whether it has changed, but I can tell you one thing, that without a Chinese team, which is your team, you really can't do anything in China. Thank you.
Thank you.
So can I ask one question, Deepak sir, if possible?
Yes, Dr. Neeta.
Yeah, so it was really very, insightful listening to the whole journey, Mr. Thomas. I just would love to ask you one thing where you mentioned that, it's not exactly about the CSR, but definitely looking after your employees, definitely looking after a lot of people whom you really did that. So could you just share one best practice during this entire pandemic, which may be at your level, which you have really said aloud and you have really practiced it?
Thank you, Neeta. I think since we're all working remotely and working from home, every person who's got infected during the pandemic or his family members have got infected, I've spoken to each person individually, and we have a very large global workforce. So that's one of the practices I've continued and promised them and assured them of all support and ensured that that support was given to them. So that's one of the best practices that I continue to follow despite the pandemic. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, that's very nice that being connected allows each and every person to express. And when you express, it's again, you have your heart-to-heart connect. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeta.
Thank you, Dr. Neeta. And Thomas, Dr. Neeta is one of our co-founders of Blue.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. She is in touch with me. Yeah. That's very nice.
Premraj, we can wrap up.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Premraj. Thank you, Deepak, and thank you, Payal. And
We will cherish the pearls of wisdom culled from your varied experiences across the globe.
I hope it was of some value.
It
My
is.
39 years of working, and we're always happy to connect with anyone for anything. Thank
We
you
are
so
richer
much.
by the experience of being in your proximity. The world needs more leaders of your breed.
Thank you.
Thank you so
We should
much for having me. Thank you.
God bless you. God
Yeah.
bless you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you. And God bless.